I'm Brandon Amoroso, and this is the D2Z podcast, building and growing your business from a Gen Z perspective. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to D2Z, a podcast about using the Gen Z mindset to grow your business. I'm Gen Z entrepreneur Brandon Amoroso, founder and president of retention as a service agency, Electric. And today I'm talking with Tyler Grech. Tyler's a Canadian living outside of Waterloo, Ontario, home of the wonderful Oktoberfest, which we'll probably get into later on here. But he's been in e-commerce for about 6 years and has gotten to work with some of the fastest growing D2C and legacy brands as a part of his time at Shopify and within the Shopify ecosystem, most recently now at Daasity. So super excited to have you on and get your various perspectives on everything. So
awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Brandon. Really appreciate it.
Well, before we dive into things, can you give everybody just a quick background on yourself and also what you're doing over at Daasity?
Yeah, sounds good. So, you touched on it a little bit there. So I've been in the ecosystem for a little over, or just about 6 years now, have held roles across various technologies within the ecosystem and spent about 3 years with the team over at Shopify Plus. Have worked kind of across various roles, whether it's from pre-sale and working on the sales teams over at Shopify to now building out the strategic partnership team here at Daasity, but have just totally kind of fallen head over heels for all things commerce, whether that's direct to consumer, omni-channel, retail, whatever it may be, and getting to work with some of these really incredible brands, operators, and all the partners in between. So been a really, really exciting journey so far. And yeah, excited to see where the ecosystem goes from here.
Yeah, I think there's definitely not a lot of industries that are changing so constantly as this one is, which I think
totally
makes it exciting and keeps me waking up every day and not being bored to death, which is always a positive.
Totally. Yeah. And then what I'm doing over here at Daasity, kind of like I touched on. So joined the team here halfway through last year to take on initially a lot of the platform and technology relationships here at Daasity, and then slowly transition to more of a strategic role where it gets to oversee relationships with some of the really exciting kind of service partners on the agency and consultancy side of things as well. But right now, just trying to scale that team as we look to make a shift kind of in this data space. So I'm sure folks have seen kind of a ton of buzz around data, especially as of late with all the changes that have been happening with things like all the iOS updates and everything. But I think folks more than ever in the D2C and retail space are honing in a lot more on data and what that means. So it makes my job super exciting in terms of being on the leading edge of what's happening from a partner perspective and how these brands are growing through partnerships.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you can work at a company where it has a really strong product, because it just makes your job so much easier and you can focus on actually like growing and scaling versus running into like platform limitations, or like I feel like nothing's worse than selling a solution to an agency or to a brand and the solution just isn't there. And so it's not because of you, it's just because the product isn't to a point where it needs to be, which is always frustrating.
Oh yeah, I've been super fortunate, I think, like in that regard, was at Smile.io early days as they transitioned from Sweet Tooth. And at the time, like the team and the product led there was just incredible. Product was super strong, had really great PMF, and then moved over to Shopify, which again, selling there was pretty fun. When you're talking about having a great product, I mean, there's very few that top Shopify as a solution. So yeah, it made my job super easy and got to meet some incredible folks over on that team as well.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably one of the, maybe not now, because I think probably now you run into like there's becoming a smaller and smaller number of prospects to reach out to. But I can only imagine what it was like being in sales at Shopify in like 2018 or 2019. It just had to be like raining from the sky. If I could go back, I might have to do like 2 jobs, do Electric and then part-time, I guess, which I sort of already was, but part-time Shopify salesperson.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, going through the CRM at the time and like seeing someone that was not on Shopify and just the record of engagement across reps. I mean, if they weren't already on Shopify, someone's definitely reached out to have a conversation at some point. I think a lot of folks made made their money off finding those folks on Magento and some of those old legacy platforms back in the day.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like that well is drying out a little bit though. But I'm still shocked at
yeah.
how many people are on other platforms, honestly, especially like WooCommerce. Like I don't understand why anybody would ever use WooCommerce, but maybe I just don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We'll chalk it up to that. So when it comes to your current role now, I mean, what are some of the things that you're seeing working or not working as you've been sort of getting up to speed and testing out new waters, both from a agency partner standpoint, but also like from net new client acquisition and stuff like that?
Yeah, good question. I think like just with the current environment, we're seeing it across the ecosystem where I think folks are just trying to do more with less in a lot of ways. So I think like for me and my team and what we're focusing on is just being hypercritical with where we're spending our time and effort. Recognizing that, especially on the tech and platform side of things, where we're actively building integrations, trying to determine like strategically where it makes sense for not only our time to be spent, but looking at our engineering and product teams as well, where we should be building. So I think now more than ever, it's really important for partnership teams to just be really critical and like, are we aligned on ICP? Do we have like the same market motivations? Do we have really strong overlap in terms of existing customer, but also prospect overlap? And just ensuring that, again, you're in lockstep with your partners moving forward, and the most limited resource we all have being kind of time and resource is spent wisely. So it's been really interesting navigating that and starting to restructure and determine how we actually like build process around that and ensure that, again, as we go to market and find the partners that are most aligned with us, it's also going to be most advantageous for the growth and success of our merchants and customers as well.
How do you sort of back out partnerships to, I guess, an ROI for the business? Because I'm sure, and I think this comes up a lot with people that I just talked to in the ecosystem. Like there's certain organizations that get it, and then there's certain organizations that don't. And you see it, especially over the last 6 months, with some companies prioritizing partnerships, while others are looking at it as this is a cost center that we could get rid of. But I think the most successful companies like Klaviyo, as an example, are just so deep into the partner ecosystem, and so much of just the numbers show their business coming through that channel. So I guess what's sort of the approach that you're taking at Daasity, and then on your end, like how do you sort of demonstrate to leadership, hey, this is a channel that we need to invest even more into?
Yeah, great question. And like Klaviyo does a phenomenal job. Their partner team is just, I think, the gold standard in a lot of ways, working with a lot of folks over there, Tyler Grech, Carlos Barrera, Chathri and her team, like they're fantastic. How we look at things, at least on the Daasity front, are through a few different lenses. I think most folks are going to be a little bit more commercially minded and ensuring that they're driving revenue. I mean, in most organizations that I've come across, partnership sits underneath the sales function and sales organization. So being able to drive net revenue is usually if not the main KPI, one of the driving KPIs for a lot of these organizations, or at least teams within an organization. From there, not just looking at kind of net acquisition, but starting to look at product adoption, understanding what ultimately is going to make the brands that we're working with and retailers we're working with most successful. We're in a unique position because we're a data platform. We're really heavily dependent on being able to connect with the sources and technologies and channels within a brand or retailer's tech stack, and also their channel strategy. So for us, it's important to make sure that we've got really strong coverage across these growing kind of ecosystems tech stack, and making sure we're looking at product adoption, integration, usage, looking at products or teams like Klaviyo as well, not just looking at their email tool, but how are we looking at adopting and growing our product to make sure that we're keeping up with the new services that they're offering, like SMS, and making sure that that finds a way into our product, and just having constant lines of communication, not just with the sales team from like that net acquisition perspective, but working really closely with our customer success teams and ensuring that we're able to use partnerships as an engine to, again, provide the best user experience for the brands we're working with, ensuring that they've got the greatest amount of coverage across the board. So I think there's a lot of quantitative from the lens of sales, but also qualitative in making sure that we're fully supporting the brands and looking at things like net retention with these folks as well, and making sure that integrations or endpoints that we're connecting to aren't the downfall to anyone potentially not working with us.
Got it. No, that all makes sense. I think it's interesting having that perspective because your product is pulling in other product information and it's sort of reliant on that. Like that's why a brand would use you, is because of that. So having to stay up to date with everything going on and making sure that things are working seamlessly, I'm sure there's a lot of time and effort that has to go into that.
Totally. Yeah, it's just staying on the beat of like what's happening in the ecosystem as well. And I think that's why it's really exciting being on the tech side of things, is just understanding who some of these new players are that are coming up. I think looking at just different verticals or technology groups within the ecosystem is really exciting. And just some of the growth that's being brought on by innovation, things like Shopify and them opening up their subscription API. I don't think I've ever seen so many like incredible players on that side of things. And it's continuing to grow. And you could say that kind of across that ecosystem as well. There's always new folks coming up that are doing some really exciting things and just adding differentiation across the board for brands.
Yeah, I think subscription is a great example of sort of a mad dash, it feels like, in the past year and a half of new solutions coming to the market. But you're starting to see that more and more. I think Gorgeous sort of set the stage for how you can attack a legacy software business, but from an e-commerce perspective. And I just had a call this morning with somebody who mentioned some random subscription app I never heard of, but it was just really funny because he was basically giving me the sales pitch that they were obviously giving to him. And it was like, oh, like we're the Gorgeous basically of subscription commerce now. Because we have all these legacy players that have done it and are have sort of paved the way, but we're going to come in net new and build off of all of their mistakes and be able to iterate from there. And I think you'll start to see that more and more, but I see a lot of businesses as well encroaching upon each other, which is interesting because the Shopify ecosystem was built off the premise of best-in-class solutions that all integrate with one another. But now these solutions they're either like, for reviews, for example, it's like, how much more can you iterate off of a product review? At a certain point, it becomes sort of commoditized across the ecosystem. And so where do you go next? Where do you differentiate? And a lot of the net new product features that are being rolled out by companies in that space are just duplicative of other solutions that we're already using. And so for me, it's like, probably long term, it's a good thing to have consolidation. Like, why do you need to have 25 tools? Like, if you look at a HubSpot for B2B, it feels like more and more that's where e-commerce is headed. But at the same time, when do the sort of the friendly partnerships that have gotten this ecosystem to where it is now start to disintegrate because you basically have the same merchants that you're going after in the same product? And so it'll be interesting for us over the next 2 to 3 years. What integrations are still supported? Which ones aren't? Do people stop sharing data with one another? Like, I don't really know where things will go there.
Yeah, I've got mixed opinions on the whole thing. Like, I'm all in favor of there being optionality for brands and being able to have choice when it comes to looking at a review platform or subscription tool or even a data platform. They should be having these evaluations and like determining what ultimately is going to be best for their business. I think each of these tools, no, I don't think they're necessarily like reinventing the wheel a lot of times, but they're definitely making iterations that are probably a little bit more like hyper niche in some scenarios, where it fits the mold for particular brands, and they find their kind of like foothold and really start to lean in there, which I'm all for. On the flip side of it, like coming from my time at Shopify, like a role I held there for a while was working with some of their strategic accounts and working really closely on growth within those brands. And one of the things that I saw was just a tremendous amount of technology and tools being used within their like app section of Shopify, and then what they're doing outside of Shopify as well. So like I think there's like two camps of brands and retailers. Those are the ones who want to have the best in breed technologies and are going to have probably a longer list of technologies that they're utilizing. But then there's also that group that is really interested in the consolidation of technology, and ensuring that maybe they might not have the tool that's best in breed in every single class that they touch, but they're dangerous enough and check the boxes for that particular brand that make it worthwhile to bring in maybe 3 or 4 technologies into a single group. So
Yeah.
I think we'll probably see more of that over the next little while, but I think there's always going to be room for folks to sit at the table. And that's true for technologies. And then going back to your comment earlier about WooCommerce or even Magento, like I think those platforms definitely serve a specific purpose and really well fit within particular brands and what they're looking for and just what they need from a platform.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. The thing that I question is like, eventually some of these companies will just run out of money. Because I don't think the ecosystem is large enough at this point yet to support 25 different subscription apps. So at a certain point, they're going to, and I don't think we've really seen it yet, but like they're going to have to either get acquired by somebody or they're just going to run out of business. And then like what happens then? You're going to have a lot of merchants that have to migrate and move back to certain solutions. So that's always why on the subscription front, I'm a little bit hesitant, especially for larger, more like mid-market or enterprise brands to make a jump to somebody who's only been around for 6 months or a year, because you're just adding in a lot of risk there for a significant component of your business. But we will see.
Totally. I think those larger brands, though, like fundamentally have a different approach to buying technology. And going back to even my days, like at Smile, when we were talking with larger retailers who were selling in the hundreds of millions of dollars in GMV, it was always trying to understand like what was runway, what are like growth and development plans, what does the funding landscape look like, and what we've taken on, to understand ultimately like, hey, if we sign an agreement, are you like, is this sustainable and something that's going to be around, or like, are we placing a bet and there's a potential for some of the technologies to go bellies up perhaps? So I think like at different stages or bands of revenue, those conversations are happening. But I think just with the funding landscape in the last 2 years, we all saw the jump in kind of commerce and everybody raising in some capacity. At some point, they're going to have to provide some type of return in a lot of ways. And it'll be interesting to see how that growth is maintained, especially as we go through some of these a little bit more challenging times, I would say. Yeah.
Well, I want to dig in a little bit on your insights to marketing and data, aside from like all your experience on the partnership side. Since you're at Daasity now, I think there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about advertising and what do brands do now that they can't just go like light $100,000 on fire every day with Facebook. Where are they going to acquire new customers? Obviously, TikTok has been a big one. I was talking about it this past weekend. Like TikTok is the #1 search engine for my generation, even over Google. And so it's just sort of crazy how that platform is. Like when I think about businesses, I usually think about like, like immediate competitors like TikTok, obviously like Instagram, but no, really like TikTok is actually competing with Google and other apps as well, because it's about time and attention. But people are like, my friends will literally go on TikTok and be like, restaurants near me in Miami. I'm like, isn't that what Google's for? So I feel like I'm old, but TikTok, I know there's been some direct mail that's been becoming more and more popular, and is something we're actually like appending on as a service here at Electric to continue to build out our sort of retention offering. But I guess what are some of the things that you're seeing? What's working? What's not working? I'm not envious of any of these brands in this position right now of like, how do they figure out the online customer acquisition problem?
Totally. Yeah, I think it like, to your point, it all depends on like what's your demographic. For a lot of the brands we're working with, we're seeing this shift in allocation where brands, like you said before, were all in on Facebook and Instagram and a little bit of Google here and there, are now like really heavily investing in TikTok. And I know for a lot of larger retailers, a lot of them, regardless, like the Shopify darlings, are starting to become a lot more curious about like what folks are doing on TikTok and how they can utilize that as a growth engine. Because like you said, it's where a lot of folks are going now to get information. I'm not one of them. My wife like spends way too much time on TikTok, and I'm just like fundamentally against it. Where I'm kind of like old school, or maybe not old school because it's still new school, but like I go to like Twitter for a lot of my news. So like that's an outlet where like I get mine. But from a brand perspective, like, yeah, we're seeing a pretty big shift in dollars going to TikTok because of those points you mentioned. I think the important thing with TikTok isn't necessarily capturing data, but being able to adequately and strategically realign dollars with particular audiences within these channels as well. And just understanding your audience and being hyper targeted with those folks. I think that's a big shift that we're going to continue to see over the next little while, pending nothing like drastic happens with TikTok usage in North America. But I definitely think it's one to follow. And I mean, you were at the same event as me in New York the other week, hearing from Steve Madden saying that's where they're really, or what they're really excited about, looking at these channels and starting to see some of their audience go in that direction as well. So I think there's always going to be like any brand who's like doing it right in the marketing front, they're not going all in on one particular channel. But I think there's a shift where they're starting to move some of that allocation over to TikTok from Instagram. We're definitely seeing it on our end, and further adoption and questions coming up about it.
As what are they doing though in terms of actually attributing conversions to the TikTok ads platform? Because I feel like people have been really excited about it, but they're not necessarily looking at it or giving it the same level of scrutiny that they were giving Facebook and Instagram historically when it comes to like ROAS, and they're relying more on what I used to think it was like vanity metrics when it comes to like the cost per impressions or stuff like that, not the actual like, hey, these are the conversions that are coming through these TikTok ads that you're running. How are brands approaching the attribution around that?
Yeah, good question. I don't have all the details per se on like how they're looking at this. I think it's still something where they're testing it out in some capacity. I mean, speaking from like our perspective here at Daasity, we're pulling quite a bit of data from TikTok just in terms of general usage. And then we have ways to kind of like map it together, and just some of our attribution models that we're looking at, going up beyond like the typical models of first click, last click, but implementing different strategies around like ad click, marketing click, assisted click, and tying those attribution models together. I think how it's measured, we've seen differing opinions and strategies brand by brand. I think the big thing for folks is just having the flexibility to choose what works best for them and how they want to report. And that's kind of like the approach we take, and just supporting them in the best way possible through the tools, at least, that we have.
Got it. Makes sense. So aside from TikTok, GA4 is something that I haven't really dug into a ton because it doesn't necessarily impact us that much. I guess, what the hell is it and why does it matter? And like what's happening with Shopify too? Because I know historically when I used to be like setting up a Shopify site, it's very easy to just connect into Google Analytics, get the enhanced e-commerce plugin going, and you're off and running. Is that no longer the case? Like, I guess sort of what's the lay of the land there when it comes to GA4?
Yeah, great question. So GA4 is the updated and new version of Google's previous Universal Analytics that most folks are accustomed to. There's going to be a sunset coming, I believe, July 1st, where there's going to be kind of this major move from Universal Analytics to GA4. And I think the best way to look at this through the lens of like e-commerce is this is very similar to a few years ago when all Magento 1 users had to move to Magento 2. And it wasn't just like a flick or an update of their versioning, but a fundamental replatform and migration. It's going to be the same thing in a lot of these scenarios. The way that tagging was done with UA in GA previously is going to be fundamentally different in GA4. So I think brands are starting to think a little bit more about this seriously. It's been up in the air for a long time. And I remember having these conversations at Shopify 2 years ago, and there wasn't a great solve for it at that point. Now what we're seeing is a lot of really strong tools in the ecosystem that are going to be able to assist with that migration, in moving folks from UA to GA4. Folks like Little Data, Elevar, and working with Daasity is something that's going to be really important, not just to ensure that all the tagging is implemented properly from one version to the next, but ensuring that there isn't a complete loss of historical data when brands are moving from one versioning to the next. Is at least what we're seeing, but it's a huge topic of discussion right now on the data front, and what strategies look like and how to maintain all of that historical data.
What I guess what's the biggest value add to going over to GA4 versus just regular Google Analytics? Is it like, I guess what is the main difference and why brands should be excited about it?
Yeah, great question. So Google's implemented, I think, just some new tools that are going to help measure traffic a little bit differently, and engagement across, again, websites, could be apps and other technologies that brands have implemented. It's not really a conversation around why they should move over, because they're going to lose access to GA and UA in a few months. It's more so like, when do they start planning and making sure that they have the plan in place? I would say, like, what we're seeing is brands who are a little bit more in tune with their data have already made that move or are starting to make that move, and running all kind of UTMs and tracking off GA4 now in anticipation for UA to be sunsetted. But yeah, definitely something that is getting a lot of attention right now. And there's a lot of really great content out there for folks to follow along with.
Got it. No, I think it is something that I think is going to bite a couple of brands by surprise.
Totally.
Because it is, any of these like forced migrations, there's always headaches associated with them.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've necessarily spent the time and dug in to understand the true, like, full implications of it.
Yeah.
I guess on its face, it makes sense. And I'm not envious of these companies like Google or any other ones where when they make a change like this, they have to do it in a way that is so staged out and like so careful. And there's just so many things that have to go into it, versus if you're like a smaller startup, you can just sort of do shit and it doesn't matter. Like, you're not going to impact tens of millions of businesses across the world, or whatever ridiculous number it is probably on regular Google Analytics. But I guess that's a good segue into sort of the last part I wanted to touch on here, which was, you're obviously at Shopify, like massive company, and then moving into Daasity, which is not 9,000 employees. So what are the biggest differences there? And I guess how have you been leveraging your larger company experience in a startup environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that friends of mine that were at Shopify and moved on kind of touch on pretty often. Coming from a large organization, there was a lot of process in place. At the time while you're there, I think you get caught up in a lot of this process, and there's a lot of red tape you have to go through, and hierarchy and just different ways of doing business that at the time can just be like really like challenging and frustrating at times. Going to a startup where there's different processes in place, you sometimes, or I would say you have a really great opportunity to bring some of these processes forward. Not all of them, because too much process just creates hurdles and unnecessary bottlenecks in a lot of cases. But bringing some of that process, some of that insight that we saw from scale. I think I joined Shopify when there was something like 3,000 employees and left when there was just under 14,000. So got to see different phases of the organization, got to see really exciting amounts of growth. I think I was there for like the 2 million merchant celebration when that milestone was hit, but getting to see challenges, things break at scale, and how to set yourself up to not completely alleviate those. I think there's always going to be challenges at any business size, but being able to make teams like I'm a part of now, or like friends are a part of, aware like, hey, as we hit this next phase of scale, this is probably something that we're going to run into. As we scale these parts of the organization, generally this is what's going to break, and how we can set ourselves up and set the right foundation early on to be able to scale effectively and productively when it comes time to grow. I also think just the level of exposure at an organization like that is something that I probably took for granted at the time. Being exposed to massive product organizations, getting to collaborate with marketing, and understanding kind of the different layers to go through in some of these organizations. What I do love about being a part of a team like Daasity is you're definitely closer to the decisions. You have a lot more impact. For me, that was a huge draw, and something that was really exciting is being able to kind of get my fingerprints on a lot of these really exciting developments and provide feedback directly from the front lines to product, and just the process of iteration and how quickly you can capitalize on some of this feedback is really, for me, exciting. And something that was maybe a little bit different and polarizing from being a part of a big organization. So both have their strengths and weaknesses, but all in all, I think just being in this ecosystem, there's so much to kind of lean into and benefit from. Really exciting time to be part of the broader commerce ecosystem, Shopify and beyond.
No, I think it's interesting how you can like take your larger company experience to infuse some of that process, but not like kill the startup mentality
totally.
and mindset. Because like for Electric, implementing process was a game changer for us and allowed us to scale. But if we had too much process now, then like I can even see it sometimes. I'm like, it's like, holy shit, just like send the quote or like just do it. It's some of the stuff is, and so it's like, how do you have that balance? Because what got you here, like you still need to hold on to that, but implement the process so that you can scale.
Totally.
It's like I feel like it's a fine line. But for me, I've always just tried to emphasize that we want to document and process everything, but that these are meant to be like a framework, and there's nuance to things, and like we all have brains and we should be using them. Like just because something is on paper like this way doesn't mean that that is 100% the way it needs to be done. And having that mindset of continual like improvement and optimization, I think is really important, so that we don't. And like I think from our moment we do our onboarding, when I talk to our new team members for like our 15-minute intro call, it's like really emphasizing like you're being hired to bring in insights, and like we value your opinion. And the worst thing that would ever happen is like we're dealing with clients or dealing with internal stuff and being like, well, the process or the document says this and we can't budge around that. Like I would never want us to be in a position like that.
100%. And I think for a lot of earlier stage companies, I've seen a lot of folks get hung up on like pushing, whether it's a product update or releasing new process or releasing new piece of content. I think a lot of folks are really hung up on getting it perfect, where I think it's early on, it's more about just like being present and getting it out there, and speed can kill. It's about just like getting to market in a lot of ways, and then being able to iterate, learn from your mistakes, and building again a bit of a process around that. Again, not to beat process to death, but just being able to iterate, I think, is the biggest thing. And unless you're pushing product and pushing updates, it's really hard to iterate. So speed is sometimes more important than getting it right.
Yeah. And the ability, I think you see this even on a brand level, not with just software. Like, hey, you just need to get stuff out there, iterate. Like, don't get so paralyzed by making things perfect, because you just spin in circles.
Totally. completely agree with you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Is there any sort of last things that you want to talk about in terms of like tips or tricks for other like partnership people on the call? Any sort of general ecosystem insights that you want to provide before we hop off here?
Yeah. I would say nothing like top of mind where I want to go in and say, hey, this is what you should do, and this is what we're seeing. I think if anything, like I would love to hear from other folks and people within your network and audience, like if you're taking a different approach to partnerships or you're seeing something work incredibly well, I would love to hear from you and just understand what's working and figuring out ways that folks can work together and learn from each other. I'm all for. And then again, like on the data side of things, I think like if anyone wants to have a conversation and understand what's going on with GA4, how folks are transitioning some of their budgets over to things like TikTok, we've got a really great team who I know would be really excited to chat. So just really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today, Brandon.
Yeah, of course. Well, before we hop off, can you let everybody know where they can find you online if they want to continue the conversations or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can hit me up there, Tyler Grech. Our team at Daasity is incredibly helpful and wildly knowledgeable in the data space, especially when it comes to marketing. So reaching out to our team direct as well is something that I would highly encourage. We're on all major channels and platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, and then of course you can reach out to our team or myself at just tyler@daasity.com.
Awesome. We'll make sure to include it in the show notes as well so that everybody can easily reach out. Well, as always, this is Brandon Amoroso. You can find me at brandonamoroso.com or electromarketing.com. Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.